What about instances of publisher or editor meddling, with the news,
Hmm.
to promote either his own interests or the interests of his
Hmm.
friends, and whether those interests are financial or political?
Well, yeah, so again, a different time. But Harry Ashmore was the executive editor of the Arkansas Gazette, and this was during the Little Rock Central High School desegregation crisis, which lasted 57 to 59. If you can say a crisis lasted 2 years, but it, but everything was practically shut down in Little Rock during that time. Ashmore found later that he probably did have something to do with the federal troops finally being sent to enforce desegregation order at Central High through David Halberstam in his book, The Powers That Be, in writing about Phil Graham at the Washington Post, told the story that he and Ashmore were in touch with each other, and Graham, also a newspaper leader at the Washington Post, was dealing with Sherman Adams, who was Eisenhower's chief of staff, and they had something to do with that decision. And didn't bother either one of them apparently, and that's the sort of thing that today I don't think an editor and generally most publishers would do.
You think it was because they saw themselves as civic leaders, and it was in their role as civic leaders that?
Well, some of them, I think that they both saw themselves as having a responsibility that what was going on was bad, and that they stepped out of what we would see today as the normal roles, which are more passive of a journalist, and take an active role to redress the problem at hand. And Eisenhower was about 3 weeks later sending those troops in. And maybe if it hadn't been for Ashmore and Phil Graham, maybe he would have dallied even longer. So that they saw that as their responsibility, a civic responsibility, and so they did something that today we would not do.
So I know John Carroll, has famously, challenged, his former paper in Kentucky to sort of correct the record
Mm-hmm.
that they had kind of ignored the civil rights movement while it was going on, and that and so they took him up on that challenge,
Mm-hmm.
decades later, and acknowledged that the coverage had really been wanting, if not non-existent. Did anything similar happen in Arkansas?
I don't. I'm not aware of anything like that. The Arkansas Gazette at that era was I thought quite courageous. If you look back though at the paper and what its stand was in the Little Rock schools, this crisis, it was not for desegregation per se. It was for obeying the law of the land, and we still lost 20% of our circulation in 2 weeks. Part of it was, much of it was the tenor of the times, but they were. I don't think that paper would have overlooked something like that. The one you referred to in Lexington, Kentucky, that the newspaper at the time in the 60s simply did not cover the sit-ins and that desegregated facilities there in Lexington. And so when John made that remark, he was then the editor of the Los Angeles Times. The editors back at Lexington decided they would just do what John said. John said that something like, it has come to the editor's attention that we failed to cover the civil rights movement. We're now redressing that. And they actually did go back and do a historical record of what happened in Lexington in the 60s.
So can you think of other ethics issues that came up in the context of covering desegregation in
Mm-hmm.
Little Rock?
Well, one incident that came up, and this is toward the end of what I call the crisis in '59, when the moderates, that is, white school board members who were willing to accept desegregation in order to keep the schools open and to have and have peace, and winning out over dead-end segregationists who closed the schools in '58, '59, and who were willing to do anything to avoid desegregation. So in the recall election, it was a showdown where all 6 of the board members, 3 moderates and 3 dead-end segregationists, had their tenure challenged, and the public, by a very narrow margin, voted for the moderates to stay in and the dead-end segregationists to be ousted. At that time, all they needed was one more member to get a majority. In an act of generosity, they offered the defeated segregationists a chance to no questions asked, give the appointing person the name of someone to go on the school board, and that person will be a sixth member of the board. He'll be outvoted or she'll be outvoted 5-1, but will be on the board. The name they gave turned out to be that of a convicted burglar. And of course our reporters, before the end of the day, were able to establish that he not only was a convicted burglar, but he was ineligible to serve because of this felony. And so the burglar came to see Harry Ashmore and said that it's a deal. I never was appointed. I'm willing to withdraw my name, and you don't need to report tomorrow. And Harry Ashmore, quite correctly, said that we don't manage the news. We only report the news. And you were appointed. You were found to be ineligible, and you have now withdrawn. We will report all of that. So I thought to myself, I think that's a good decision. But it's the sort of thing that I never studied in college. And because we did not have a course such as we have now in journalism ethics with case studies. And I said, well, maybe there ought to be something that we teach in college, editor's decisions or something like that, the kind of dilemmas, or maybe this wasn't a dilemma, but the kind of difficult decisions you might be presented with as a working journalist. And from all that, though, has evolved, I think, particularly in the last 25 years, the kind of courses we have around the country in universities now.
So maybe a last question. Assuming we're doing a good job of training ethical journalists, here, at the university, and they're going to read your book, and they're going to take our classes. Is it enough, or do newsrooms need to do more in terms of, once you're a working professional, do you need additional training or remedial training? What else should happen, do you think?
Well, I think that, first of all, that the editors of the paper, the top editors, should lead by example, that they should make it clear that these are not just words on paper, what our standards are. I remember John Merrill, when he came here and lectured for us at Penn State, and he's opposed to codes. He said they're only good for framing and putting over a hole in the wall. But I think that they're more than that if the leaders will pay attention to and lead by example, and also take seriously transgressions and deal with them in a transparent way that is fair, but make it clear that this is not going to continue if it's wrong. But I do think they also need to do continuous training, and this is something that we've never were good at in the newspaper business. And now that we're in a more difficult, shall we say, financial climate, training always was the first thing off the table, off the budget, and I don't think that's a good idea. Hairdressers have a more in-service training than journalists do, and I think that the Knight Foundation has done surveys of working journalists who say that one of the great frustrations of business is that not enough attention is paid to keeping up with what's going on. And you mentioned about when we did the ethics code at the Inquirer, that got me involved because I became the adjudicator. But another development that got me involved and got me to thinking about it was Michael Josephson, the ethicist from Los Angeles, who was referred to the Inquirer by Ben Bagdickian, and Gene turned him over to me, and we set up the in-service training where Michael would come out and do his seminars at the Inquirer, and they were very, very good. And even though he didn't charge a lot of money, we ultimately the paper discontinued that kind of training because of the cost. It's not a good idea. And another problem is that editors don't want to turn their reporters or their copy editors over for training because they can always figure out something they need to have them doing. And so I finally had to pass a rule that once they have been scheduled for training, they're no longer your people. You can't just come and get them out of a meeting, out of a room. And even the reporters would be reluctant to come because they had more things that they needed to do. Once they got there, though, I think that they got their teeth into, and they really got a lot out of it. That's my reading of the thing. So I didn't think we need to do a lot more, and I wish that every journalism organization would do a lot of in-service training, including ethics.
So I think we have time for the Jackie Robinson story, and then we can let you go.
So it's not directly related to journalism at all, or it's not related to journalism, but it's part of my formative experience of growing up in a segregated South, and listening to my elders there about how segregation, both races like segregation. Well, I never really knew enough about that, but about 1950 in our segregated movie theater in Little Elaine, Arkansas, where I went to high school, and had segregated audience, but they showed, and I'm surprised now in retrospect that they would show the Jackie Robinson story where Jackie played himself. And it was, I still think it's a very well done movie. Maybe if I saw it again, I would not agree from a technical standpoint, but I was quite moved with it. I think I was maybe been about 14 or 15. But at a certain scene, and it's true, that several of the players, led by Dixie Walker, not for nothing was he named Dixie, came to see Branch Rickey and said, if Robinson plays, we're not. We're gone. And Rickey, without missing a beat, says, then you're gone. And at that point, there's a huge roar from the upstairs balcony. And I knew what was going on. It was an eye-opener for me, that I learned a lot about race relations in the South at that point. So, it influenced me as I watched the civil rights movement unfold in the years ahead.